a recognition that for society as a whole, the nation presumably will be better off if children are raised in a setting where there's a male and a female. And there are many cases where that's not possible. Divorce, death, single parents, gay parents, and so forth. But for a society to say, we want to encourage, through the benefits that we associate with marriage, people to form partnerships between men and women and then raise children, which we think that will be the ideal setting for them to be raised.
Speaker Gingrich has to weigh in.
I just want to raise, since we spent this much time on these issues, I just want to raise a point about the news media bias. You don't hear the opposite question asked. Should the Catholic Church be forced to close its adoption services in Massachusetts because it won't accept gay couples, which is exactly what the state has done? Should the Catholic Church be driven out of providing charitable services in the District of Columbia because it won't give in to secular bigotry? Should the Catholic Church find itself discriminated against by the Obama administration on key delivery of services because of the bias and the bigotry of the administration? The bigotry question goes both ways, and there's a lot more anti-Christian bigotry today than there is concern on the other side, and none of it gets covered by the news media.
As you can tell, the people in this room feel that Speaker Gingrich is absolutely right, and I do too. And I was in a state where the Supreme Court stepped in and said marriage is a relationship required under the Constitution for people of the same sex to be able to marry. And John Adams, who wrote the Constitution, would be surprised. And it did exactly as Speaker Gingrich indicated. What happened was Catholic Charities that placed almost half of all the adoptive children in our state was forced to step out of being able to provide adoptive services. And the state tried to find other places to help children. We have to recognize that this decision about what we call marriage has consequence which goes far beyond a loving couple wanting to form a long-term relationship. That they can do within the law now. Calling it marriage creates a whole host of problems for families, for the law, for the practice of religion, for education. Let me say this: 3,000 years of human history shouldn't be discarded so quickly.
Governor Paul, Congressman Paul, let me bring this to you. You're running here in the Republican primary, but you haven't promised to support the party's nominee in November, and you refuse to rule out running as a third-party candidate if you fail to get the nomination. Why not rule that out?
Well, I essentially have. It's just that I don't like absolutes, like I will never do something. But no.
Never vote for a debt ceiling.
Please don't interrupt me.
Just
So I have said it in the last go-around. I said they asked me that about 30 times. I think maybe you've asked me 4 or 5 already. And the answer is always the same. You know, no, I have no plans to do it. I don't intend to do it. And somebody pushed me a little bit harder. And I said, why don't you plan to do it? I says, I don't want to. So I have no intention. But I don't know why a person can't reserve a judgment and see how things turn out. You know, in many ways, I see the other candidates as very honorable people, but I sometimes disagree with their approach to government, and I'd like to see some changes. I want to see changes where they're talking about a little bit of a difference in foreign policy, an interest in the Federal Reserve, a change in the monetary policy. We haven't heard one minute of talk about cutting any spending. Just talked previously about cutting the military spending. That's cutting proposed increases. This is why I have proposed that we cut a whole $1 trillion the first year. If we're serious as Republicans and conservatives, we have to cut. So I want to put as much pressure on them as I can. But besides, I'm doing pretty well. You know, third wasn't too bad. I wasn't too far behind it. Doing pretty well. Catching up on Mitt every single day.
Governor Perry, do you think everyone on this stage should rule out third-party candidacies?
I think anyone on the stage is better than what we've got in place. And let me just address this issue of gay marriage just very quickly. And it's a bigger issue, frankly. I am for a constitutional amendment that says that marriage is between a man and a woman at the federal level. But this administration's war on religion is what bothers me greatly. When we see an administration that will not defend the Defense of Marriage Act, that gives their Justice Department clear instructions to go take the ministerial exception away from our churches where that's never happened before, when we see this administration not giving money to Catholic charities for sexually trafficked individuals because they don't agree with the Catholic Church on abortion. That is a war against religion, and it's going to stop under a Perry administration.
I would like to turn now, if I can, back to foreign policy and Governor Huntsman, Afghanistan. 90,000 troops tonight, and we salute them all serving in Afghanistan. What is the earliest you think they should be brought home?
You know, we've been at the war on terror for 10 years now. We've been in Afghanistan. And I say we've got a lot to show for our efforts, and I, as president, would like to square with the American people on what we have to show for it. The Taliban is no longer in power. We've run out al-Qaeda. They're now in sanctuaries. We've had free elections. Osama bin Laden is no longer around. We have strengthened civil society. We've helped the military. We've helped the police. I believe it's time to come home. And I would say within the first year of my administration, which is to say at the end of 2013, I would want to draw them down. And I want to recognize Afghanistan for what it is. It is not a counterinsurgency. I don't want to be nation building in Southwest Asia when this nation is in such need of repair. But we do have a counterterror mission in Southwest Asia. And that would suppose leaving behind maybe 10,000 troops for intelligence gathering, for special forces rapid response capability and training.
Governor Romney, time to come home?
Well, we want to bring our troops home as soon as we possibly can. And Governor Huntsman says the end of 2013. The president and the commanders are saying they think 2014 is a better date. We'll get a chance to see what happens over the coming year. We want to bring our troops home as soon as we possibly can. And I will, if I'm president, I will inform myself based upon the experience of the people on the ground that are leading our effort there. I want to make sure that we hand off the responsibility to an Afghan security force that is capable of maintaining the sovereignty of their nation from the Taliban. But I can tell you this: I don't want to do something that would put in jeopardy much of the hard-earned success which we've had there. And I would bring our troops home as soon as we possibly can. Of course, based upon my own experience there, going there, informing myself of what's happening there, and listening to the commanders on the ground.
Governor Huntsman, you have a disagreement.
Yeah, I would have to tell Mitt that the President of the United States is the Commander-in-Chief. Of course, you get input and advice from a lot of different corners of Washington, including the commanders on the ground. But we also deferred to the commanders on the ground at about 1967 during the Vietnam War, and we didn't get very good advice then. Here's what I think is around the corner in Afghanistan. I think civil war is around the corner in Afghanistan. And I don't want to be the president who invests another penny in a civil war. And I don't want to be the president who sends another man or woman to harm's way that we're not able to bring back alive. I say we've got something to show for our mission. Let's recognize that and let's move on.
Speaker Gingrich, do you have any quarrel with that?
Well, I think we're asking the wrong questions. Afghanistan is a tiny piece of a gigantic mess that is very dangerous. Pakistan is unstable, and they probably have between 100 and 200 nuclear weapons. Iran is actively trying to get nuclear weapons. I mean, they go out and practice closing the Straits of Hormuz, where 1 out of every 6 barrels of oil goes through every day. And if they close the Straits of Hormuz, you have an industrial depression across the planet within 48 hours. You have the Muslim Brotherhood winning the elections in Egypt. The truth is we don't know who's in charge in Libya. You have a region-wide crisis, which we have been mismanaging and underestimating, which is not primarily a military problem. We're not going to go in and solve Pakistan militarily. We're not going to go in and solve all these other things. Look at the rate at which Iraq is decaying. I mean, they began decaying within 24 hours of our last troops leaving. And I think we need a fundamentally new strategy for the region comparable to what we developed to fight the Cold War. And I think it's a very big, hard, long-term problem, but it's not primarily a military problem.
Senator Santorum, would you send troops back into Iraq right now?
Well, I wouldn't right now,
but
what I would say is that Newt's right. We need someone who has a strong vision for the region, and we have not had that with this president. He has been making mistakes at every turn in Iran, in Egypt, I would argue Libya, Syria, Israel. All of these places, he has made mistakes on the ground that have shown the people in that region that we are the weak horse. That is something that cannot happen because it will cause events like you're seeing in the Straits of Hormuz. There will be push America is soft, and so they can be pushed around. That's what this administration has done. They did it by withdrawing from Iraq, and as Newt just said, you want to see what's going to happen, John, if we get out of Afghanistan? Let's just wait the next few weeks and months and see how things turn out when the United States isn't there, and see how consequential our efforts were for the stability of that region.
So how long do you want to wait, Rick? How long do you want to wait?
To the security of our country is ensured. That's what the job of the commander-in-chief is. And you make that decision, not the generals, you make that decision based on an analysis of understanding how virulent the threat of radical Islam is. And you confront that threat not just militarily, and importantly, not just militarily. You confront it first by being honest with the American public about what this threat is. This president has sanitized every defense document, everything. There's the word radical Islam doesn't appear anywhere. Why? Because we are fighting we're trying to fight this politically correct war and not being honest with the American public as to who the enemy is, how virulently they are, and why they hate us, and what we must do to stop it.
Governor Perry, we know you have differences with President Obama, but who's got the better of this argument right here between Senator Santorum and Governor Huntsman?
Well, I think that I would send troops back into Iraq, because I will tell you, I think we start talking with the Iraqi individuals there. The idea that we allow the Iranians to come back into Iraq and take over that country with all of the treasure, both in blood and money, that we have spent in Iraq, because this president wants to kowtow to his liberal leftist base and move out those men and women. He could have renegotiated that time frame. I think it is a huge error for us. We're going to see Iran, in my opinion, move back in at literally the speed of light. They're going to move back in, and all of the work that we've done, every young man that has lost his life in that country will have been for nothing, because we've got a president that does not understand what's going on in that region.
Mr. Speaker, do you agree send back troops into Iraq right now?
Well, no, but let me put it in context. I was very honored today to have Bud McFarland come to introduce me at our Veterans Rally. Bud was for 5 years Ronald Reagan's National Security Advisor, and I worked with him in the 80s on the strategy to defeat the Soviet Empire. Here's the key thing to remember. If you're worried about the Iranians in Iraq, develop a strategy to replace the Iranian dictatorship, and Iraq will be fine. If you want to stop Wahhabism, get an American energy policy so no American president ever again bows to a Saudi king, and then you can put pressure on the Saudis, because you have enough American energy to stop them.
Governor Romney, you've said that you would not send troops in right now, but give us a sense of the trigger. What would it take for you to send troops back in?
It's a very high hurdle. The decision to send our men and women into harm's way is one which would be made with great seriousness and sobriety and concern.
Things?
Well, you can't begin to say what the specific circumstances would be, but it would have to require significant, dramatic American interests. You'd have to have a president that explained those interests to the American people, that also indicated how we're going in. We'd go in with exceptional force. We would indicate how success would be defined, how we would define also when we were completed, how we'd get our troops out, and what would be left behind. The president didn't do that in Libya. The president hasn't done that anywhere. I find it amazing that we have troops in harm's way around the world, and in Afghanistan right now, in Iraq in the first 3 years of this president's term. He doesn't go on TV and talk to the American people every month about the sacrifice being made by these men and women. I find it extraordinary that a very few number of families are paying the price of freedom in America. So the hurdle to actually put in our troops in harm's way is very, very high. And the test is America's interests, our security interests, and they have to be involved in a very significant way to deploy our troops.
Well, I want to give Congressman Paul a chance to weigh in here, because foreign policy is something that a lot of people think is your Achilles heel when it comes to getting elected. You've said that you wouldn't have authorized the raid to get Osama bin Laden. You think that a nuclear Iran is really none of our business. How do you reconcile that when part of your job as president would be to prepare?
I think that's a misquote. I don't want Iran to get a nuclear weapon. I voted to go after bin Laden, so that, takes care of that. But, this business about when to go in, I don't think it's that complicated. I think we've made it much more complicated than it should be. Yes, the president is the commander-in-chief, but he's not the king. And that's why we fought a revolution, not to have a king and decide when we go to war. We would have saved ourselves a lot of grief if we only had gone to war in a proper manner. And the proper manner is the people elect congressmen and senators to make a declaration of war, and then we become the commander-in-chief and we make these decisions. But we went into Afghanistan, we went into Iraq, and now